Hello, my name is Martin Tarazon. In this video, I'm going to share with you some information about three main models or theories of second language acquisition. These are social linguistic models, and cognitive models. Social linguistics has three main models: the acculturation model, the nativization model, and the accommodation theory. The acculturation model in second language acquisition is a theory proposed by John Truman to describe the acquisition process of a second language by members of ethnic minorities that typically include immigrants, migrant workers, or the children of such groups. This acquisition process takes place in natural context of majority language setting. The main suggestion of the theory is that the acquisition of a second language is directly linked to the acculturation process, and learners' success is determined by the extent to which they can orient themselves to the target language culture. Truman identifies 8 factors that influence social distance: social dominance, integration pattern, enclosure, cohesiveness, size factor, cultural congruence, attitude factor, and intended length of residence. He also identifies 3 factors that influence psychological distance: motivation, attitude, and culture shock. The nativization model is the process through which, in the virtual absence of native speakers, a language undergoes new phonological, morphological, syntactical, semantic, and stylistic changes and gains new native speakers. This happens necessarily when a second language used by adult parents becomes the native language of the children. In the case of English nativization, English is often a functional language meant to serve as the language of communication in a multilingual, multi-ethnic community. This transfer of features from other languages to the target language is a variation of the extension strategy, but takes on a social linguistics slant. Speakers of these emerging varieties of English often view their unique pronunciations as a marker of cultural identity, rather than something to be correct. These are acceptable ways to speak. In contrast, to imitate British or American English phonologies can come across as snobbish to a speaker's speech community. The accommodation theory is the process by which participants in a conversation adjust their accent, diction, or other aspect of language according to speech style of the other participant. Accommodation most often takes the form of convergence when a speaker chooses a language variety that seems to fit the style of the other speaker. Less frequently, accommodation may take the form of divergence when a speaker signals social distance or disapproval by using a language variety that differs from the style of the other speaker. This theory was developed by Howard Giles in 1987. He explained accommodation theory as a theory that examines underlying motivations and consequences of shifts in verbal behavior. The point of accommodation theory is to be able to communicate with others effectively. Without it, problems with language barriers, age barriers, or understanding people clearly can be a result of failed communication accommodation. Now, allow me to share with you another models, the linguistic models. In this group, we have the discourse theory, the variable competence model, the universal hypothesis, and Swain's output thesis. The discourse theory has great implications in an educational context. It shows how written, visual, and oral text give more depth to the text when the context is understood. Instructional dialogue should be closely linked to the particular scenario in the classroom. The thoughts and connections between teachers and students during the process of teaching and language acquisition develops the rigorous nature of pedagogy. The discourse theory has resulted from a theory of language use. The theory emphasizes the language development should be viewed within the framework of how the learner discovers the meaning capacity of language by taking part in communication. Discourse analysis considers the larger discourse context in order to understand how it affects the meaning of the sentence. The main principles of this model can be described as follows. 1. Second language acquisition follows a natural route in syntactic development. 2. The native speakers adjust their speech in order to negotiate meaning with non-native speakers. 3. The conversational strategies used to negotiate meaning and the resulting adjusted input influence the rate and route of second language acquisition in a number of ways. The variable competence model, Rob Ellis in 1984 proposed this model. According to him, many aspects of language and vocabulary are learned implicitly through exposure, word structure and form, collocation, word class, and certain extent meaning. This suggests that a great deal of exposure to a target language is necessary for learning. He proposes that the ability to use language varies systematically within functions, domain, and linguistic context, and that such variability is inherent in interlanguage as well. This model is based on 3 principles. 1. There is a single knowledge store containing variable interlanguage rules according to how automatic and how analyzed the rules are. 2. The learner possesses a capacity for language use which consists of primary and secondary discourse and cognitive processes. 3. Second language performance is variable as a result of whether primary processes employing unanalyzed L2 rules are used in a planned discourse, or secondary processes employing analyzed L2 rules are used in planned discourse. Within these linguistic models, the universal hypothesis proposes that humans possess innate faculties related to the acquisition of language. According to Chomsky, the idea that human languages, as superficially diverse as they are, share some fundamental similarities, and that these are attributable to innate principles unique to language. The fundamental hypothesis in this model is that all languages have certain basic structures in common. These are called universals. It is a pattern that occurs systematically across natural languages, potentially true for all of them. For example, all languages have nouns and verbs, or if a language is spoken, it has consonants and vowels. It can be defined as a set of principles which apply to all languages and is composed of 2 types of universals. Substantive, which include distinctive phonetic features of which sounds are made, and syntactic, categories such as noun, verb, subject, object. Swain's output thesis, another linguistic model developed by Merrill Swain, proposes that learning takes place when learners encounter a gap in their linguistic knowledge of the second language. By uttering something, the learner tests this hypothesis and receives feedback from an interlocutor. Swain defines 3 functions of output. The noticing function, learners encounter gaps between what they want to say and what they are able to say, and so they notice what they do not know or only know partially in this language. 2. The hypothesis testing function. When a learner says something in a target language, there is always a hypothesis behind the utterance. 3. The metalinguistic function. Learners reflect on the language they learn, and hereby the output enables them to control and internalize linguistic knowledge. The last but not least group of theories are the cognitive models. Within these models are grouped the following: the monitor model, McLaughlin's information processing model, the multidimensional model and processing operations, a neurofunctional theory, and parallel distributed processing. The monitor model. Stephen Krashen's monitor model may be the most cited theory of for learning a second language. The core parts of Gradient Monitor model are composed of 5 interrelated hypotheses. The acquisition learning hypothesis. Gradient believes that language acquisition and language learning are two very distinct, separate things. The monitor hypothesis. The monitor acts in the planning, editing, and corrective function when 3 specific conditions are met. The second language learner has sufficient time at their disposal. They focus on form or think about correctness, and they know the rule. The natural order hypothesis. Gradient believes that the acquisition of grammatical structures follow a predictable natural order. Some of these grammatical structures are acquired earlier and others are acquired much later. The input hypothesis. Language acquisition occurs through interaction slightly beyond the learner's present level of competence. And the affective filter hypothesis. Gradient believes there are a number of affective variables that play a role in second language acquisition. These hypotheses put primary importance on the comprehensible input that language learners are exposed to. McLaughlin's information processing model. McLaughlin believes that learners are only able to process part of the input they receive. In order to compensate for this, learners acquire certain skills through routinization, which helps them to lessen the burden on their information processing capacity. The other part is restructuring, in which learners are able to expand their information processing capacity and to introduce important changes into their interlanguage. Learners can present 2 types of changes: affecting the way knowledge is represented in the mind and conditioning the strategies used by learners. For McLaughlin, practice is important for restructuring, although he is not specific on the details of how this happens. The multidimensional model and processing operations. This was developed by a group that included Klassen, Mason, Piniman, and Johnston, first in Germany and later in Australia. The most common name for its first version is the multidimensional model of Mason, Klassen, and Piniman in 1981. The later version is often called the teachability hypothesis after one of its claims, Piniman, in 1989. The label multidimensional reflects the central claim of the model that second language acquisition has 2 sides. On the one hand, there is a rigid developmental sequence for certain aspects of language that is unaffected by aspects of learner or of the environment. On the other, a variational sequence for other aspects of language will respond to differences in the learner or the situation. The developmental sequence is claimed to depend on general factors of language processing. The variational sequence is based on learner variables such as the extent to which the learners are integrated into the target culture. A neurofunctional theory. Lamandela's neurofunctional theory of second language acquisition states that the acquisition of second language and foreign languages is mainly the product of neural, brain-based processes. In turn, the neurofunctional activity is also based on subprocesses which take charge of specific pieces of the language itself. The main feature of this model is that there is a close connection between language function and the actual anatomy of the brain. It is also believed, according to Alice, that the right hemisphere participation in second language acquisition will most likely occur in the early stages of acquisition, as this is the time of intensified use of phonemic speech. Parallel distributed processing is based on the idea that the brain does not function in a series of activities, but rather performs a range of activities at the same time parallel to each other. The principles and assumptions of this approach to second language acquisition were mainly of a psychological nature and were based on several computer models that stimulate language learning. The framework involved 8 major aspects: a set of processing units represented by a set of integers, an activation for each unit represented by a vector of time-dependent functions, an output function for each unit represented by a vector of functions on the activation. Proponents of parallel distributed processing believe that language learning involves the activation of nodes and the creation of pathways between neurons within the brain. Hope you have found this information about main models or theories of second language acquisition interesting. Thanks for watching.